Reflection seismology is the fundamental tool for revealing the structure of the outer part of the Earth. And it can display this structure with spectacular images of sedimentary basins with faults in the very shallow area here offshore Morocco, or the deeper structure of sedimentary basins in the southern North Sea, or here these spectacular thrust structures offshore Namibia. It also reveals the structure of the seabed and of ancient seabeds in the subsurface. It reveals the structure of buried volcanoes and even can image the entire crust, so here imaging the Moho underneath Spain. Sharing the geological interpretation of seismic data. That's the tagline for the Virtual Seismic Atlas. It went live in 2008 and since then has been sharing seismic images and their geological interpretation to students, researchers and the public at large around the world. A guiding principle of the Virtual Seismic Atlas is that it's free at the point of access. My name's Rob Butler and I'd like to take you on a tour of the VSA. We'll look at its functionality and a little bit about why it was put together. And for that reason, let's start with a bit of history. In the early 1980s, the AAPG put a whole series of seismic images into the public domain by publishing these atlases in large format. They were known as the Bally Atlases after Bert Bally, who edited this collection. Well, these atlases show some really fantastic data, like these profiles provided by Pieri from the Po Plain, showing, well, apparently, a whole series of interesting thrust structures. Now, the atlas shows the clean data and then also an interpretation. Now, that's great, we've got a picture and work atlas, but it gives the impression that there's only one interpretation that's valid, whereas in practice, profiles like this have a very high degree of uncertainty. I think that's unhelpful and gives students the wrong impression that maybe there's only one correct answer here. Well, of course, there's only one reality in nature, but as interpreters, we don't know what that is. So we have to be able to carry forward the idea of multiple possible interpretations. Paper atlases like this have a hard time achieving that range or illustrating that range of possible interpretations. And this is where the VSA, the Virtual Seismic Atlas, comes into its own. So let's see how the VSA can handle this issue of multiple interpretations. So here's a single clean image, and the VSA shows two competing interpretations of it that we can compare with one another. But actually it shows more than that. If we scroll down this page, we find that those two are joined by others. So we can capture an array of alternative interpretations that begin to illustrate the uncertainty in subsurface interpretation of this particular profile. So if we go back to the original clean image and look at the top of the page there, we can see its relationship to what we call a regional project, which is a long seismic line, and to a survey. So let's click back all the way out to the survey, which is an umbrella. So we can see that there are a series of seismic lines that are similar to one another that lie within this survey. So the VSA can show multiple interpretations and the relationship between similar images. And what's more, it can be updated dynamically so more interpretations can be added into the future. So to see how the VSA is structured, let's just start here with an interpretation I put together a good many years ago now for part of the offshore of Namibia. So this image with geological graffiti is an interpretation. If you look at the abstract next door, it points you to the docks and links. And there you'll see it links to a video where you can watch me make the interpretation in the first place. So we can use the docks and links area to connect people to other resources associated with the original image. Now if you look at the bar along the top of here, we can link back to the clean seismic image which lies behind the graffiti. So in this format we're rather like the Bally Atlas's, the picture and work format, although of course other people could have added other interpretations as well. But we've got a clean image and interpretations separate from one another. We can also put this in context to see where this scene, which is a zoom in of a profile, lies with respect to a broader context by looking at the regional project to which it relates. And this now is along regional seismic line to which the scene was a zoom in. And then we can click even further back out and find other images that relate to the overall survey, which is the umbrella we use to describe the content relating to a single seismic experiment. And in this particular case, we're back to some of our original content on the VSA. The lines that we've included here were provided to us by our partners at the time, Veritas, who are now part of CGG. So here's the hub that links all these images together. Because this work links to a paper that I put together with Douglas Payton many years ago now, you can find the link to the paper that's in GSA today by going to the docs and links from the relevant regional project, which is an open access publication. So the VSA can connect people to a wealth of other information. And it's all controlled by the VSA authors. Well, you might think that we don't need the Virtual Seismic Atlas because the internet contains many images of whatever we might be looking for in seismic sections. Well, let's see what happens when we try and search for images using Google. And I'll just do a search for normal faults. So there's the Google return for searching for images of normal faults. There's some diagrams on here that I can recognise actually. And let's now refine this, because I can't see any seismic profiles on there, by typing in seismic profile. And now we've got a whole pile of images in here. Again, some of which we can recognise. One of them that's returned is actually from the Virtual Seismic Atlas. But not everything on here is a normal fault. Let's look at that image halfway along the top row there. And actually, the lower part of that image shows what seems to be an array of thrust structures. So there are images here that are not actually what we were looking for and may indeed confuse the inexperienced. Also, there's no real relationships between these images. A Google search is limited by the metadata that can be assigned to an image, which might come from a caption or something like that. In addition, the searches tend to generate the same output, so we get exposed to the same examples again and again. Well, we can overcome those issues within the Virtual Seismic Atlas by designing our own metadata structures and connecting those to the images within the VSA. Let's see how that will work by conducting a search. So let's conduct a search looking for crustal scale normal faulting and particular types of normal faults that are listric. So we're going to use the menu structure on the left hand side to guide our navigation. So if we move down this and select from the deformation structures, let's start by looking for faults. And I've just clicked in here and selected faults, and you'll see that the images have updated to show all the interpretations here that contain faults. So now let's select normal faults, and we can see that our selection that is returned is refreshed to show images that show normal faults. Let's continue our search now to look for listric normal faults. So we can select from the deformation structures listric and see what happens when we click that. Well, we get a whole set of new images. Interestingly, these ones, if I quickly scan over them, are from sedimentary basins and in rather shallow section. Okay, well, we've looked at listric normal faults. Now let's try and refine this now to get the ones that cut through the entire crust. So if we look at the menu on the side in here, we can select basement, open this up, and we see that there's moho in here. So if an image shows the moho, it will show the whole of the crust. So let's select that one. And now we've refined our search to such an extent that we've got 4 solutions. 2 and a bit that we can see on this screen. Let's just scroll down and we can see at the bottom there, well, let's be interested in that one. Let's look at Alistair Beach's 1986 interpretation of a particular line. And there it is. We can now click on this to find the high resolution image, and there's Alistair Beach's interpretation of that particular seismic line. So I can quickly browse and find a whole set of images. Now what happens when I find this interpretation? We can then relate it back to the clean image to which it relates by clicking here. And there is the clean image at the top, which is the Burps North Sea Deep Profile 84-1 across the Viking Graben. And we can see that their other interpretations are beginning to appear lower down on the screen. And indeed, there's a whole pile of interpretations of this one seismic line. And again, we can use this information to compare Alistair Beach's interpretations with perhaps some others, perhaps the Marsden et al. One at the bottom there. So let's do that. We can click the high resolution images here and compare the different structural styles. One showing listric normal faults, Alistair Beach interpretation at the top, which is how we found these images in the first place, and some rather more conventional stubby planar normal faults in Marsden et al.'s interpretation below. So let's go back to the Beach interpretation here and indeed think about how we found it. And we found this by first searching for faults and different types of faults, and then we selected the MOHO to get the crustal scale structure. Well, let's try and find that image again, but using a different pathway. And we'll do that by just changing the sequence in which we enter the search terms. So let's go back to the home search page here and conduct the search again. This time we'll reorder our search terms. So we'll start off by looking for the MOHO. So let's click on MOHO, and now we're getting a whole series of profiles here. We've got one there from the Outer Isles Fault at the top, one from southern Finland, in fact 2 Finnish profiles there that display the MOHO. So by taking this particular search route, we're seeing a different array of images. So now let's refine further and look for those images that contain faults, and particularly normal faults. So here we go, and we've gone back to crustal structures in here that contain normal faults. Now we can refine further and get specifically listric normal faults, and we do that, we come back to the 4 images that we returned the first time. So different pathways are taking us to Beach's 1986 interpretation. Each path we take allows us to see images that we might not have otherwise known to exist. So let's go back out from Beach's one to the search with 4 from 4 in here, and we might say, oh, that's interesting, let's look at that drum filtered 2 profile, this one in here, and we can see that this is a clean regional line. There's an interpretation that we might otherwise not know to exist at the bottom there, and if we're interested in that clean image, we can click on it and find it there in high resolution. We can also click all the way back to the survey at the top here, and we see that the drum profile was part of the Burps program. And if we open on the docs and links to the Burps survey there, by clicking on that tab, we find that there's a location map and a link to the external data portal that is a home to the original SegWi data for the drum profile. So that's a quick tour of guided navigation. For me, this type of searching is really powerful. It shows me images that I otherwise wouldn't know existed. So it allows serendipitous discovery of new types of structures, new to me, and it increases my experience. It's a really creative part of the Virtual Seismic Atlas. So the VSA is an image gallery that shares the geological interpretation of seismic data. And these images are not restricted to vertical profiles alone. Let's just go back to our search page, and at the bottom here we can see there's a setting called image type. So let's select then time or depth slices here, and this reveals a set of time slices through various structures like those karstic surfaces at the top or through a salt dome in the middle there. Okay, let's go for another image type, and this time let's just go for a horizon map. So this is where we get into seismic geomorphology. So here we see some buried structures, some reefs or submarine channels, and in the middle there an image of the modern seabed offshore Colombia. And we can look at full 3D images such as seismic cube structures and their visualizations. We can see horizon maps with profiles cut in, or entire blocks of seismic cubes. And of course there's still plenty of vertical profiles in the atlas, from profiles across sedimentary basins or the entire crust, or even just the shallow near seabed. So a great variety of image type in the VSA. These days there's plenty of seismic data and imagery that's available via various databases around the world. But if I'm going to look for an analogue structure, let's say I'm looking for a normal fault, I need to know which data sets show normal faults. So I need expert knowledge to conduct the search. And I also need to know whether the images are particularly good resolution or not. So will I find the normal fault in the data set when I go and look for it? So we need to be able to browse images, not data. And that's what the VSA does. Should they choose, it can give organisations the opportunity to showcase their data, promoting them to individuals who seek examples of types of seismic structures or the records of particular geological processes, but who don't know where in the world to find them or which data sets reveal them. So this in turn can promote future research on these data sets. The VSA is a useful way of connecting to resources, of creating opportunities to share knowledge and to reach new communities, thereby maximising the value of legacy data. So that's the Virtual Seismic Atlas. I hope you've enjoyed the tour. So in the early 2000s, Bill McCaffrey and I were doing a bunch of research in partnership with a series of major oil companies. These companies had huge knowledge of the world's sedimentary basins, much of which was going digital and going into their online data libraries. Now, the challenge was that in order for individuals to access the information, let's imagine they were looking for an analogue structure or maybe the early history of the development of a particular oil field, they relied on their experts in-house to know what was in the database so that it could be pulled out and given to the younger geoscientists. And the catch, of course, is that these experts were nearing retirement age. So how could companies retain access to all this information they had stored away to make it useful to future generations of explorers? Well, in our work in collaboration with BHP Billiton, Bill and I saw that they were doing things in a rather radically different way and providing a software solution to connect individuals to information they were after that didn't involve the intervention of experts. GetKnowledge had two critical software components. It had a Documentum database, which was searched through software called Profind that was developed by the company endeavoured. So Bluefish, their digital partners, built GetKnowledge from a foundation of the Documentum database and the endeavoured software, wrapping them up together into the GetKnowledge application. What really appealed about GetKnowledge to Bill and I was the faceted search structures, which meant that you drilled into databases to find content by clicking repeatedly, drilling down into that database, and every step you took exposed you to other content you otherwise wouldn't be looking for, which gave the opportunity for chance discoveries of new knowledge or new to the individuals making the search. That ran counter to the ways in which many people at the time thought that the internet and digital searches should function. The idea that maybe one click should access exactly what you're looking for. If you do that, you lose the opportunity for serendipitous discovery of new information. And that's what the GetKnowledge approach gave people. It's also how online retail worked at the time and still does today. Retailers want their customers to see a variety of their products, not just go to the one thing they're after in their shopping, because it creates new opportunities. So the click, click, click approach is much the best way to find content, provided you can get your search system to work quickly so people aren't waiting for pages to load. And by 2005, the solutions were there to allow that type of searching to work. And that's where we went when we designed the VSA. So we had the concept developed in about the middle of 2005. Once we were funded, we could then test how GetKnowledge worked. We were able to create our vision for what the Virtual Seismic Atlas would do. And then working with Bluefish, we collectively developed that solution, delivered it in late January 2008. We then had a couple of months testing the application, tweaking it and tuning it so that in April 2008 we launched the Virtual Seismic Atlas to the public. A guiding principle of the VSA is that it's strictly not for profit and free at the point of access to allow the broadest possible access to seismic imagery and its geological interpretation. And we were keen that it became a community resource. So the VSA application was constructed by Bluefish, who were able to build on the knowledge they gained from creating BHP Billiton's GetKnowledge application. And like GetKnowledge, it had a foundation in the Documentum database and used Endeca's Profine software. We then developed partnerships with a series of seismic companies who published some of their images from their multi-client data libraries, along with BGS, who held publicly available seismic imagery, some structural consultancies who provided some interpretations, and publishing houses such as the Geological Society, which allowed their authors to republish seismic imagery to which they held the copyright. So from day one, the Virtual Seismic Atlas was to be based on partnerships. All this took quite a lot of funding. We had access to the proprietary software behind the VSA because of discounted licenses, but of course we still had to commission Bluefish, and there was significant staff time in the design, testing and populating the VSA. So this is how the first edition of the VSA was structured. So at the heart of the VSA is the Documentum database. Endeca-powered guided navigation wraps around that, and that in turn is wrapped around by the VSA application, the website, which allows this system to work and be accessible to the public at large. The first version of the VSA went live in 2008. So this was the original landing page. You could enter the VSA and find relationships between regional projects and zoom-ins and scenes like this. You could scroll down and see these scenes, and you could then turn these into picture and workbook and see how a variety of interpretations relate to the clean image. A facility that the VSA retains to this day. So the VSA from day one was an open access facility that allowed people to find analogues for structures they were interested in, an array of training materials for new generations of students, and to promote new research opportunities by showcasing images of seismic data that researchers were otherwise unaware of. So the VSA was able to promote data sets, showcase expertise, seismic technologies, and breaking research. By 2014, the licenses behind some of the integral software in the VSA became more complicated for us to use. So we took the decision to rebuild and at the same time give the VSA a new look and feel. So the VSA was rebuilt in partnership again with Bluefish using open source software, with the aim of giving it greater resilience. This rebuild cost us another 50 or 60k. Most users of VSA content are happy just to browse and extract information that they want to use themselves. However, one of the really key development points of the VSA from day one was to provide an authoring environment to allow people to add content themselves. And we can do this by creating access credentials for individuals. So everybody gets access to the content. If you're a registered VSA author, you can add new content subject to any permissions you may need to get for the original data owner. So here we have a regional project without a login. As a registered user logged into the VSA, you can add content now. So from this regional project, you could add a scene, in other words a zoom in of that regional line, or you could add an interpretation, some geological graffiti on top, and propose that for publication within the VSA. You also gain access to a My VSA area, which is an authoring platform. So if you have the permission of the data owner to publish seismic data, you can create a new survey and build the entire structure from top down. And as a VSA author, you control the metadata that's assigned to your images. So let's see how that might work. We'll just click on the survey. Here we are. You can add its name, you can add the images, a little bit of text, but you can then add metadata from a series of menus that expose the taxonomy behind the VSA. So a series of tick boxes like this allow VSA authors to quickly populate the metadata tree. Once you create the survey, any regional projects you later create in that survey can inherit this metadata automatically. So the VSA is a publishing environment. All the content is open to all, and it's open for them to use subject to acknowledging the source, in other words the intellectual property, as it would be for any other publishing situation. So everybody gets access to the content. If you're a registered VSA author, you can add new content subject to any permissions you may need to get for the original data owner. In order for that content to be published and accessible on the VSA, it needs to be approved by one of the VSA team, making sure that no offensive or inappropriate material or anything that might impact negatively on the value of the original seismic appears on the VSA. So that's a brief history of how the Virtual Seismic Atlas we see today came about. Through 2020, it became clear there was a divergence between the software within the VSA and the network protocols which allowed access to it from the host site in Leeds. So we required a quick rebuild of part of the functionality. So now in 2022, the VSA requires further attention, and we'll use this opportunity to refocus the content to face the energy transition while still providing access to the legacy knowledge and imagery that has allowed so much progress in the understanding of sedimentary basins.